You've probably seen a helicopter land and noticed two people sitting up front in the cockpit. Seems excessive, right? A car only needs one driver. Small planes fly with one pilot all the time. So why does a helicopter, basically just rotors and a metal shell, need two people to operate it? Is one of them just backup in case the other gets tired? Is this some kind of regulation nobody actually needs? And what exactly would go wrong if one pilot just handled it solo? The answer isn't caution or redundancy, it's physics, human limits, and an impossible workload split three ways at once. But the real reason has nothing to do with having a spare. Here's the thing most people miss. A helicopter isn't just a big flying machine. It's a physics problem with no autopilot solution, a navigation puzzle running in real time, and a communication hub that never stops demanding attention, all happening at once. And unlike an airplane, which can trim out and fly straight while you check a map or talk to air traffic control, a helicopter requires constant, active control every single second it's in the air. No brakes, no coasting. The cyclic stick controls pitch and roll. The collective lever controls altitude. The pedals manage the tail rotor to prevent spinning. The throttle keeps the engine in range. All four inputs, all the time, or the aircraft drifts, drops, or spins. That's not an exaggeration. That's the engineering reality of rotary-wing flight. A plane, once it's trimmed and cruising, is aerodynamically stable. You can take your hands off the controls for a moment. Not recommended, but physically possible, and it'll keep flying straight. A helicopter does the opposite. It's inherently unstable. The rotor is always trying to tilt the aircraft. The torque is always trying to spin the fuselage, and wind gusts hit harder because helicopters fly slower and lower, so the pilot's hands and feet never stop making tiny corrections. It's like balancing a basketball on your fingertip while someone throws tennis balls at you. Now add navigation, radio calls, weather monitoring, and systems management on top of that. That workload doesn't fit in one human brain. Not safely, not for long. Here's where people get it wrong. They assume helicopters are just smaller, simpler aircraft. But the cognitive load is actually higher than flying a jet in many scenarios. A commercial airliner at cruise altitude has autopilot handling the flying, navigation system showing the route, and the pilots mainly monitoring. A helicopter pilot flying under instrument flight rules, IFR, meaning in clouds or bad visibility where you can't see the ground, has to scan 6 flight instruments constantly, interpret them correctly while the aircraft tries to drift off course, and input control corrections, all while tracking a 3-dimensional flight path, talking to air traffic control, and not hitting terrain. One person can do this, but one person doing this is operating at the edge of their capacity, with zero margin for anything going wrong. And things go wrong constantly, not catastrophically, but operationally. An engine parameter shifts. A hydraulic system loses pressure. A warning light flickers. The weather changes faster than forecast. Another aircraft enters your airspace. Air traffic control changes your routing. In an airplane, the pilot flying keeps flying, while the pilot monitoring handles the problem. Checklists, radio calls, troubleshooting. In a single pilot helicopter, that same person has to do both. They have to keep flying the unstable aircraft while also diagnosing the problem, running the checklist, and communicating with the ground. The accident reports are full of scenarios where a single pilot got behind the aircraft, focused too long on a problem and lost control, or focused on flying and missed a critical warning. Both mistakes are fatal. Now here's the part that sharpens the picture. Not all helicopter flying requires 2 pilots. A pilot doing a short visual flight, VFR, meaning clear weather, staying in sight of the ground. No complex navigation. In a light helicopter like a Robinson R-22 or a small Bell can handle it solo. The workload is manageable. They can see where they're going. The route is simple, and the flight is short enough that fatigue isn't a factor. Traffic helicopter pilots do this daily. Agricultural pilots do it. Flight instructors do it. But the moment you add complexity, instrument flight, long distances, challenging weather, unfamiliar terrain, night operations, The workload multiplies and the safety margins collapse. That's when the second pilot stops being a luxury and becomes survival equipment. The offshore industry figured this out decades ago, and they figured it out the hard way. Helicopter crashes in the North Sea and Gulf of Mexico during the 1980s and 1990s, many involving single-pilot operations in bad weather over open water, led to industry-wide mandates that are still in place today. Now, every helicopter shuttling workers to oil platforms operates with two pilots, no exceptions. The flight profiles are brutal, 100 to 200 miles over open water, often in weather that grounds other aircraft, with no alternate landing sites if something goes wrong. One pilot flies the aircraft, the other manages navigation, monitors fuel burn, communicates with the rig and shore base, and handles any emergencies. It's not redundancy. It's task distribution for a mission that one person physically cannot safely execute alone. Medical helicopters follow the same logic but for different reasons. An air ambulance carries a flight nurse and a paramedic in the back, but they're not pilots. They're treating the patient. The aircraft is flying at low altitude, often at night, navigating around terrain and obstacles, coordinating with ground units and hospital helipads, all while someone in the back is running IVs and doing CPR. Two pilots up front means one can focus entirely on flying, while the other handles the radios, reads the approach plates for the hospital, and manages the aircraft systems. A widely cited 2008 study, though the methodology has been debated, found that single-pilot EMS helicopters had a significantly higher accident rate than dual-pilot operations, particularly in conditions requiring instrument flight. The math was brutal enough that insurance companies started requiring two pilots for coverage in many cases. Then there's the technology question. Modern helicopters have better autopilot systems than older models. Some can hold altitude and heading, even fly basic instrument approaches. GPS navigation has replaced paper maps. Glass cockpit displays consolidate information that used to require scanning a dozen separate gauges. So why hasn't technology made the second pilot obsolete? Because autopilot in a helicopter isn't the same as autopilot in a plane. A helicopter autopilot can reduce workload, but it can't eliminate the need for constant attention. The aircraft is still fundamentally unstable. The autopilot is still just making the same control inputs a pilot would make, and it can disconnect without warning if it gets confused or if the aircraft exceeds certain parameters. A single pilot relying on autopilot is one system failure away from being instantly overloaded. Search and rescue operations make this even clearer. A Coast Guard helicopter searching for a missing boat at night is flying low over water, using searchlights and infrared cameras, coordinating with ships and other aircraft, all while maintaining precise navigation to cover a search grid without missing areas or duplicating effort. One pilot flies. The other manages the search pattern, operates the mission systems, and coordinates with the rescue swimmer and hoist operator in the back. It's a six-person crew doing jobs that can't be combined. The idea of one pilot doing all of that is absurd to anyone who's actually flown the mission. Here's the surprise. You've been trusting this system your whole life without knowing it. That medical helicopter that airlifted your neighbor after the car accident, two pilots up front, flying under IFR at night to a hospital 60 miles away while the medical crew kept him alive in the back. The offshore oil rig workers who commute over the Gulf of Mexico every week. Two pilot crews on every flight, because the industry learned the cost of single pilot operations in body bags and lawsuits. The news helicopter that covered the wildfire near your town, depending on the station and the conditions, possibly two pilots, one flying, one coordinating with the ground crews and framing shots for the camera operator. Search and rescue teams in national parks, two pilots managing terrain, weather, and rescue coordination simultaneously. The presidential helicopter, Marine One, operates with two pilots plus additional crew because the risk calculus for flying the President of the United States allows zero margin for error. Even tour helicopters over major cities increasingly use two pilots during peak traffic times or challenging weather because the insurance, math, and liability exposure makes single pilot operations too expensive when something goes wrong. That sound you heard overhead during a disaster or emergency? That was a crew splitting an impossible workload between two people because one person doing it alone is a statistical accident waiting to happen. So here's where you land. You looked at that helicopter cockpit and thought you were seeing inefficiency, extra expense, or overcautious regulation. But what you were actually seeing was a workload equation that doesn't fit in one human brain, physics that doesn't allow autopilot shortcuts, and an industry that learned through fatal accidents exactly where the line between possible and safe actually sits. That second pilot isn't backup. They're half the minimum viable crew. And if you think helicopters are complicated, wait until we get into why the same helicopter can carry twice the cargo at sea level compared to mountain altitude, and why that difference has killed more pilots than most people realize.